I understand why people like it. It's just not my style of Star Wars that I like. Longa, guys. Hopefully you got a chance to celebrate May the 4th and took in a whole bunch of Star Wars content. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about Tales of the Underworld. So, Tales of the Underworld came out yesterday, and I thought it might be a little bit longer. Maybe they were going to include some stories they didn't tease us with in trailers, but it turned out that it was just going to be about short story of Asajj Ventress and a origin story of Cad Bane. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about each one of those. Now, starting with the Asajj Ventress story. So I thought this was really cool. I like that they opened it up with how Dark Disciple ended, and kind of showed us something. I like that they leaned into something directly from the books. I think there's been a lack of that. They haven't wanted to lean on some of the older stories that people grew up with or enjoyed, or pre the Disney acquisition. And I think in this case it kind of right off the bat establishes a emotional connection. If you read the book, it kind of sets the stage for what's happening, if you know what's happening. But it also worked. If you didn't read the book, then it gives you enough information to understand. So what I liked about this was, first of all, anything with Asajj Ventress is pretty good. She was a very complex character in the Clone Wars. She had her own motivations, she had her own ambitions. She, you know, was Dooku's assassin, and then she was with the Night Sisters, and then she became a bounty hunter, and she felt like those she thought were on her side weren't necessarily on her side, to the point where we would even see her take up arms with Kenobi if it benefited her, right? To fight off Maul and Savage, right? In that one example, right? She was ready to team up with Kenobi to get herself out of that. And that was kind of a focus of this show in Tales of the Underworld, was that we hear that one character say, the bounty hunter, you know, she doesn't do anything unless she benefits from it, right? So, when we hear that the Padawan, presumably a Padawan who survived Order 66, is looking for the path, you know, and he mentions a Quinlan Voss set this up, you immediately think, okay, well, she's going to help him go find it so that she can reconnect with Quinlan, whether she could or couldn't, based on, what Mother Talzin told her. You still are wondering, okay, what's the benefit for her? And, in the end, there's nothing that benefited her from helping that kid. She brought him there and she was ready to leave. She did leave. And, I think it was a testament to the fact that, okay, she has changed as a character. She does have this arc now where, once upon a time she wouldn't do anything unless it benefited her, but she's grown and she's changed, and she put herself at risk helping this kid, and she did it, with no extra motivation other than doing the right thing. On a more surface level, I felt like, in the spirit of Star Wars, it was just kind of its own little adventure. Um, in most cases, I'm a sucker for the Force and lightsabers, so doesn't always do the trick. But to me, Star Wars without the Jedi and without the Force and without lightsabers is just kind of subpar sci-fi most of the time. I think there's a reason why they shoehorned Darth Vader into Rogue One, and they shoehorned Maul into Solo. Like, you know, both of those movies could have not had that in there, and it almost would have been the same movie. But I think to some level they recognize that, and they're having success with Andor with none of that stuff, which I'll kind of get to in this video. But there's something to be said about the fact that they kind of shoehorn that stuff in whenever they can, and that's Star Wars at its heart. Is that, that's where the overarching belief system comes from, is the way of life of the Jedi and the good versus evil and this mysterious power that binds everyone together. So I enjoyed that. I liked seeing them bring that aspect back into the story. You know, I do think that they may be, that maybe they're setting the stage for something else. It was just 3 episodes that felt like it could be the beginning of a longer story. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. I mean, she can't survive for too long. Um, I think by the time A New Hope comes, all these surviving Force users have to die for the most part, with the exception of the few that we know. But it doesn't mean they can't take it somewhere. So I'd be definitely interested in seeing where that is. That's really kind of all I have to say about Asajj. Now, on the Cad Bane piece of the story, I really, really, really liked this. I really liked how they set it up, where it humanizes him as a kid in the streets and living off what he could find, but he wasn't. Him and his friend weren't bad kids. They were just doing what they could to live, right? Stealing food out of the garbage. They're living on the rooftop. There's a big Aladdin vibe. They're making references to street rats, and they're living on the roof. And there was a playfulness to it where they weren't a threat to anyone. They weren't doing anything wrong. They're probably annoying, but they weren't villains, right? They weren't bad kids. They were just doing what they had to do to survive. I liked how they introduced their mentor, the leader. I can't remember his name now, but he was kind of dressed as Cad Bane. And for a second, I was confused because I was like, is that supposed to be him or not? But I like how when he died and Cad Bane took his hat and kind of took over his persona almost. It reminded me a lot of Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, when Indy steals the cross from the gravediggers, and the guy, he has to give it back, and the guy comes and gives him his hat, and then it goes to the jumps 20 years in the future, or 10 years in the future, or something like that. And now he's dressed exactly like that guy. Like, he stole that guy's style. I just liked that. And I think that was done intent. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Dave Filoni was referencing that, if it was some sort of almost like an Easter egg or something like that. But I liked that. I liked how this added a human element to Cad Bane. I mean, I know that was the purpose, but I still think Cad Bane is a scumbag. Like, I still think he's like a piece of shit. But like, like you get it a little bit more now. What I really liked about this was, I think as a whole, this show, and I'm including Tales of the Jedi in this, and I was not a fan of Tales of the Empire, but Tales of the Jedi I'm a huge fan of, and I think Tales of the Jedi was better than this, but not by a wide margin. What I like about this is that there's so much to be said about the Star Wars animation, because they're hitting on themes that are not geared specifically at kids. Like, a kid could watch all of this and it's fine, but it's still, like, they gunned down, Cad Bane gunned down his friend who was raising Cad Bane's son, which, that, I don't know, that may or may not go over a kid's head, right? But it's Cad Bane's son. This other guy took him as his son, and then he he blows this guy away in the street right in front of the kid, to the point where the kid's now kneeling over his dad's, who he thinks his dad's dead body is. It's still like a smoking corpse, and it's like, that's not a kid friendly image. It's not something that would be in a TV G rated show, right? You're still touching on these darker, adult, serious themes without making it so much more adult or so much more mature that, like, a kid can't handle it, or it can't be for everybody, or something like that. And I'm not, this is where my Andor discussion kind of comes in, because I'm not doing any reviews of Andor or anything like that. I am watching it, um, and I think Andor is good. I think Andor is good. It's really well written. It's very smart. I think it's a testament that, okay, they haven't introduced any Sith, Jedi, lightsabers, none of that, and people love it. So they can do it. It's not exactly my thing, but I understand why people like it. It's just not my style of Star Wars that I like. That being said, I'm watching it and I'm not enjoying it. However, there's a weirdness around the I don't want to say the fandom because I don't want to single those people out and attack them or something, because it's not around the fandom but around the interaction with the fandom, and the difference in views is that I could have just said what I did and somebody would be like, "Oh, that's cuz it's a mature Star Wars and it's an intellectual Star Wars." Like there's this really weird type of thought process around it that to like Andor and to understand Andor, you're mature and intellectual, and that's what everybody is saying. You go on Facebook, you go on Instagram, you go on Twitter, like that's the go-to line is that Andor is mature and a more intellectual Star Wars. Which, okay, fine, but you can achieve the same thing with a show like Tales of the Underworld. Like that's not a kids show, but a kid can still watch it. It can still hit on all the themes of Star Wars and not be like too soft, and the fact that it's animation doesn't mean anything. There's so many people who still won't watch these animated shows because it's a cartoon, when meanwhile it's hitting on some very adult themes and very adult material, just like in Clone Wars had some seriously dark stuff in it, and people are missing out on it, and they're like, "Oh, Andor is the first mature Star Wars thing in years," and it's like, well, like Star Wars is just Star Wars. Like I don't get that whole argument of mature Star Wars or intellectual Star Wars or whatever. I just think it's kind of a strange way to approach all of it. I think this show is a great example of the fact that you can do all of the above. You can do all of the above in any form of media. Like, and for me, I'm only comparing it to Andor because it's the two shows running at the same time. Even though Tales of the Underworld is shorts and it's done, they release it all at once. But to me, Tales of the Underworld had a much more Star Wars feeling, and like that's what I'm looking for. Like I'm looking for stuff that is about Star Wars, and I don't get that with Andor. And again, Andor is good, but it doesn't to me scream Star Wars unless there's stormtroopers on the screen and there's and I get that the galaxy is bigger than that, but the story within the galaxy is still focuses around these you know main people and main events. There's a reason why Lord of the Rings follows Frodo, and if you want more, you go read the Silmarillion. So maybe it's the same, but it doesn't give me that fantastical vibe that usually comes with Star Wars. So I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. I'm just saying for me, it's a little bit different. And Tales of the Underworld, Tales of the Jedi, they're able to hit on those, you know, more adult themed situations and things that are for fans that are of my age and still maintain that same feeling of Star Wars and of kind of this mystical fantasy element. I guess I don't like my Star Wars too gritty. I just don't. I kind of like it to be um kind of a fairy tale or kind of a fantasy story. I don't want realism in Star Wars. That's why it's Star Wars. But um I think that getting back to Tales of the Underworld, it's they did the Cad Bane arc was definitely the stronger of the two arcs. I would have liked to see more from both of those, but the the Cad Bane arc was very human. I'm very big on revenge stories and things like that, and you know this had that all over it, and it was for me a huge shock when I think it was in the third episode that they reveal that the friend had ended up marrying the Cad's girlfriend, and I was like, oh my god, this just got a lot more complex like that, and I didn't expect that out of something from Star Wars, but we got it, and it worked, and I really enjoyed it. There's not too much more to say about it. For me, probably an 8.5 out of 10. I liked it. I want to see more Tales stories. They've done Tales of the Jedi. They did Tales of the Empire. They did Tales of the Underworld. They're going 2 for 3. Tales of the Empire sucked, in my opinion. I'd like to see Tales of the Old Republic. Um, I'd like, I mean, you can go so many different routes with it. But I'd really love to see Tales of the Old Republic. I'd love to see Tales of the Sith. They did a Tales of the Jedi. Let's see Tales of the Sith and show us a Plagueis arc. Show us a Revan arc. Show us a Malik arc. Um, Show us a Bane arc. Like, if they did Tales of the Sith and they did Bane and Malik and Revan and Malgus and Plagueis. Like, you could do that. They did Tales of the Jedi, and I think it was 4 arcs, right? So 3 or 4. They could do Tales of the Sith and do those big bads, and not even include Vader, not even include Sidious, and just go old school and start setting up some of that lore. And listen, you already borrowed from Dark Disciple. So borrow from the books that everybody already loves, and don't fuck it up. Then, like, you could start something huge. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for next, would be a Tales of the Sith, and then probably followed by like a Tales of the Old Republic, where it's showing maybe the Jedi and Sith war. Um, I'd love like an Exar Kun piece of media, just something in visual form. But like, Exar Kun is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, and I'd love to see something with Exar Kun. You could do that in Tales of the Sith or Tales of the Old Republic or something like that. Like, it'd be crazy. So any of these Tales formats I'm enjoying so far. So I'm hoping to see more of them. So that's really all I have to say about Tales of the Underworld, and kind of what I want to see moving forward with this series. So drop a comment if you watched it. Let me know what you think. Subscribe for more, and I will see you on the next one.